Welcome, everyone, to our graduate case study reviews. I'm Dr. Rebecca Troy, owner and founder of Retrain the Dyslexic Brain. And again, if you are newer to our community, these are actually events that we hold every other week because we are, number one, super proud of our client graduates and our families for all of the hard work that they have put in and the amazing data changes and success that they have achieved, as well as it's really important to us to tell stories of hope and inspiration. I mean, I think it's absolutely incredible what has happened for Mimi and her mom Julie, and so I'm thrilled to be able to tell their story. But I think it's also very hopeful. And in this case, Mimi at age 14 is what we would consider an older child going through dyslexia support. And so it can happen where people get told that it's too late, or, if they didn't learn that when they were younger, it's too late to be doing that now. And this is just a beautiful example of how that's absolutely not true. And when you dig in to support a child who hasn't had the help before, even if they're older, it is absolutely possible to make huge statistically significant change. So I want to walk you through that today and share with you not only the data, but also Mimi's story, which I think is incredibly powerful. So just as an overall snapshot, Mimi went from 86% accurate in her phonological awareness to 95. Her reading went from the 13th to the 39th percentile. Her spelling went from the 3rd to the 24th. Her mom, Julie, said it's possible, doable, and hard work, and it's going to pay off. Mimi will move into her adulthood without these stumbling blocks. If you set the fear aside and open your mind to possibilities, really anything is possible. So I just want to kind of briefly cue you into some of the methodologies that we're talking about. So everything that we are about to discuss is something that Julie did at home with our support. So as a company, Retrain the Dyslexic Brain does give cutting edge neuroscience techniques to families, and we walk them through step by step exactly what to do to developmentally help their child to overcome the deficits between letters and sounds in their brain, help them to be able to apply that into reading and spelling. And so we typically see that happen within a 16-week interval. So that's really what we're talking about. Everything that we are about to discuss is something that Julie did with her daughter Mimi with our support from their home. So before we dive too much further into it, I always want to have families understand what dyslexia actually looks like from a neurological perspective, because I think it's critical for your understanding of how best to support and treat this. So what you'll see over on the right-hand side of the screen are two brains in an fMRI. So on the left, you have a person without dyslexia, and on the right, you have a person with dyslexia. And this is during a language task. And that's an important distinction because if we were to look at these two brains at any other interval, we wouldn't notice anything wildly different about them. Dyslexic individuals are very intelligent. This has absolutely nothing to do with their intelligence. Most people with dyslexia have average or above average intelligence. But what happens in their brain when they experience a language task is very, very different. So what you'll notice over on the left is that this non-dyslexic person has activity in the back of the brain, which we call the occipital lobe, and that's where vision is controlled. And they also have a lot more significant activity in the parietal temporal lobes, where we process a lot of the sounds. So it's quite literally activity in where we process letters and sounds, vision and auditory in the brain. But when you look at a person with dyslexia, there just isn't that activity. So that's why when your child sees the word cat and it's CAT, they may not process what those letters actually sound like. And the longer that that word is, the more and more difficult that that would be for them. So if we put the word provision They might get that it's got a P and they might get that it's got an R, but everything that happens after that is either going to be a guess or they'll mumble over it or they'll skip it. And that happens because the brain literally is not processing the visual component of that alongside of the sound. Like they're just neurologically disconnected together. This area is underdeveloped. And so another way that we can look at that, this is actually an EEG of the same thing, but we see the very large neurological differences between sight and sound. It's the same reason why if your child is trying to spell a word, that they might add letters in that don't belong, that they might omit letters that should have been there, or maybe even an entire syllable, or they'll confuse a vowel. And again, that's because neurologically there is this disconnect in their brain. They literally don't have development between letters and sounds. But here's what I think is really, really important for you to know as a parent is that neuroplasticity is a real thing. And there have been seminal studies, whether that is of London cab drivers who had to memorize a map of the city. And before they had that job and after they had that job, they developed entirely new spatial reasoning and spatial awareness areas of their brain that they didn't have before. Or, gosh, they've studied people who have done yoga and meditation daily and the changes neurologically and physically that have occurred in their brain. They've studied stroke victims, people who have had entire areas of their brain be damaged, who have developed workarounds and have actually made those same functions possible after treatment. So we know that plasticity is possible, but here's what's amazing. Here is the actual visual proof of what happens neurologically when you help a child with dyslexia to neurologically connect together letters and sounds, is they have the ability to do the same things that typical readers would do, which is just super, super powerful. So that's really the work that Julie and Mimi were up to, is helping Mimi's brain be able to connect letters and sounds together and then be able to apply that to her reading and spelling. So let's dive into specifically what this looked like for the two of them. And I would guess that you're likely going to see yourself or your child through these stories. So specifically for Mimi, she did struggle with reading at an early age, and she did show very different patterns compared to her non-dyslexic brother. So if you are newer to dyslexia and you don't really know what that is, you never had any exposure or experience with that before, oftentimes the reason that families are able to really diagnose or be aware that that's even happening through siblings. So sometimes it's an older sibling that's already gone through the learning journey and they realize that, like, wow, this is very, very different for this child. Or sometimes what happens is if the dyslexic child is actually the older of the siblings, it's when a younger sibling might eclipse the older one in terms of their reading development or spelling development. And you say, like, whoa, something's not right here. And so that happened in Mimi's case too, where she just was showing very, very different reading and learning journey than her non-dyslexic brother. Mom described spelling as a full-on kryptonite. She had major, major difficulties with it. She was guessing at words rather than sounding them out. Although, and this is pretty common, reading comprehension issues um, were likely fine when she was being read to. It's when she actually had to read the words herself, and she was expending so much of her energy trying to just figure out what the text said. And unfortunately, in Mimi's case, because she was guessing at a lot of those words, if you guess the wrong word, it completely changes the meaning. And so that can have obviously a very significant impact on reading comprehension. And so, she's very verbally strong. You'd have a conversation with her. She's got amazing vocabulary. You'd never know that something was going on until she was actually asked to do those things herself, and then you could see the breakdown. But what I think is true for what was true for Mimi is so common among the clients that we see is that they do develop a significant anxiety around reading or writing. And in Mimi's case, it was very significant toward writing. And Julie said she was quite literally afraid of the pencil due to her spelling difficulties. She didn't even want to write it down because she was nervous, like, well, what if it's wrong? And if I get the wrong letter, or if I do the wrong thing? And so she didn't even want to pick up writing. And so self-judgment and her lack of confidence around reading in groups definitely happened more and more the older she got. But the heartbreaking part is that she is a very natural storyteller. And so if you don't know this already, kids with dyslexia also have heightened creativity, and the ability to storytell is often very natural for kiddos with dyslexia. And so what was heartbreaking is that she had these natural storytelling abilities and she couldn't put them down because of the full-on kryptonite with spelling that she was experiencing. So she was deeply frustrated by that inability to document her stories. And so Julie had found us through a webinar, and it was kind of during that webinar that it became very obvious to her that, like, oh my goodness, this is dyslexia. I thought she was just struggling. I didn't realize that that's what this is, but that's what this is. And in fact, like, I also am dyslexic. And so it was in that realization that she and her family were able to really lean in and say, oh my goodness, here's what's amazing about this. I know because of previous, Julie had experienced some medical issues, concerns that had left part of her brain damaged. And so she herself had to do some neurological rehabilitation. And so she knew and deeply believed in the power of plasticity. And so once she was able to name this and say, like, oh my goodness, we know that this is what's going on, and we know that there's something that we can do to support Mimi. No brainer. Absolutely. We're digging in to get her this help. And so this was actually their first intervention attempt. So a lot of families that we work with do find out earlier, but they've gone through years and years of intervention and support and not really made much of any progress. And so for Mimi, this was actually the first time that she had had some significant help for reading and dyslexia. And her mom said module 6 was particularly challenging for her, but she had some really serious breakthrough moments as she was going through the process. So she went from taking 15 minutes to break down one word to completing 10 words in 15 minutes. And now, she's at a place where she's reading multiple books. She's got her face in a book all the time. And so just massive, massive transformation. I'm not to get ahead of myself. I'm going to be talking about that in a minute. But the other thing that was really kind of cool and unique about Julie and Mimi's story is that because Julie is dyslexic herself, she participated in the program alongside of Mimi. And so it was interesting that different modules or different pieces of the neurological development affected them differently or challenged them differently. So she said from her perspective, it was really fascinating to watch their development differently. But was really amazing for me as a practitioner was how articulately Julie could share, like, oh my goodness, I was doing this and my brain really hurt today, or oh wow, I had this light bulb moment and here's what's happening. So because, she's so articulate, she was able to tell us directly what that felt like for her, which was really quite amazing too. So, one of the things that was necessary to address and a challenge that Julie and Mimi had to work through is this idea that, like, what we're doing is babyish. And so, what can happen sometimes is kids feel like, oh, I'm older. Developmentally, this isn't what's for me. So I'm going to just skip that. I'm going to only work on reading comprehension. I'm going to only work on reading fluency. But if we don't do the foundational pieces that really are making the brain challenged in terms of connecting letters and sounds, then we can't move on to the more difficult things. And so she did. She was able to coach her through that. She's her mom. She knows what motivates her. She knows how to stay positive with her. And so that's exactly what that took to just help reframe that for her. But they were absolutely great about that consistent daily practice that we prescribe. She said that was absolutely their secret sauce for neural pathway development. Mimi is now saying, I can spell and I'm no longer afraid of the pencil. Like that was a quotation that came out of her mouth. Like, I'm no longer afraid of the pencil, mom. And so she hand wrote an entire lined page for a church speech, which mom said was previously impossible. She reads chapter books regularly. She received an 18-book series for Christmas. She's improved her confidence in reading aloud in class. She came home one day and said, I read in class today and I didn't feel embarrassed. That's a powerful quotation. Holy cow. She's even improved in her visual and artistic abilities, where she's saying, like, I can even draw better now. And she's now considering taking creative writing classes in high school. So I think that example in particular just goes to show how tightly tied together beliefs and skills really are. And so when we started to increase Mimi's skills and she felt like, yes, I can read, yes, I can spell, and we worked that mindset piece right along with it, she's able to increase her confidence. She's able to overcome some of her beliefs about what's possible for her future, which is absolutely life-changing. Julie was willing to share some of the things that she noticed about her own self. She said, oh my gosh, my working memory improved exponentially. So before the program, she was remembering only 2 digits at a time, and now she's fully remembering 6-digit passwords. She said, I couldn't, it didn't dawn on me until, they had asked me to enter in my bank password or, to log into this particular thing, enter in this 6-digit code. She said, I didn't have to look back. Previously, I would have to go back after every letter and then remember just one letter at a time or 2 letters at a time to type that in. And I was able to do the whole password. And I got done and realized, like, oh, wow, I didn't even look at that. So just massive changes in her working memory. She did have physical pain during the retraining that disappeared after consistent practice. She overcame high agitation during exercises, and she gained tools that to manage her own dyslexia that again had worsened after a medical treatment. So her description of the program was like creating the brain's prosthetic. So consistent daily practice is essential. Our mind affects our brain so directly. And so she felt that our program's inclusion of mindset coaching was absolutely critical to their success. So if I go back and kind of think about some of the challenges that Mimi experienced that are probably not so different from other children who might be older and getting some reading support, you do have to work through that challenge of like, well, why do I have to do this? And how come I can't do that? And why are my peers doing this? And maybe I'm never going to get it, or I'm so stupid, or all of those negative self-talk things that can happen to kids and absolutely depreciate any of the skills that they may have gained or their belief in even trying for future success. So it just had such a positive impact. They reframed challenges as gates rather than barriers. Age is not a limitation. Despite being 14, Mimi made statistically significant progress in all areas. Julie helped her to understand that they weren't building little kid exercises, but the necessary building blocks. But she just said, I am so profoundly relieved as her mom to know that she's going to move into her adulthood without these stumbling blocks. She's been empowered to have skills to continue to support her brain development. And I think some of her mindset reminders is you just never know when you're 24 hours away from a massive breakthrough. So, setting those limitations, telling yourself you can't do it is just not useful for anybody. She said, set the fear aside and open your mind to possibilities. So I think, Mimi's case in particular is a massive demonstration of this program's effectiveness, even for older children, the importance of parent involvement and the life-changing impact of addressing dyslexia through brain-based methods rather than through traditional tutoring approaches. So let's take a look at Mimi's data, and I'll walk you through exactly what this means and why it's so significant. So at the beginning, Mimi did a phonological awareness test, which was 86% accurate. She was still missing the ability to hear sounds in words. Some of those things were guesses. She was able to move that up to 95% accurate, which is a huge jump for her. When we look at her scores on the wide range achievement test 5, these are norm referenced. And so I'm going to quickly show you what a normal distribution looks like and why this data is so powerful. So in the middle, you have the 50th percentile, or what we would consider to be average. And so researchers have actually looked at what type of growth is typical. So if we are a 7th grader and we start 7th grade and we finish 7th grade, the average growth that a child would make during that time is a 0.3 of a standard deviation. So it would be like going from this red line to the blue line. So if you are trying to catch your child up and you want to invest in an intervention that is going to close the gap or actually make more progress than just what the average kiddo is doing, you have to have something that would have at least moderate statistical significance, which would be a 0.5 of a standard deviation, or a statistically significant result, meaning that we know with data that there is absolutely no way that the program or the intervention didn't have a positive statistical impact on the child. And so that's at a 0.8 or almost a full standard deviation of growth. So let's take a look at that as this pertains to Mimi. So when she started out, she was at the 13th percentile. And again, if she would have just made what an average kid does in an entire school year, she would have gone to this yellow mark here. If she would have made statistically significant progress, meaning like we know with certainty that the program had a positive statistical impact for Mimi, she would have made it to this tan dot here. But she actually went a standard deviation and a half above that, and she ended at the 39th percentile. So just absolutely massive statistical growth, blew the top off of what would have been a statistically significant score, which is harder to do the older you get. And the reason for that is other kids who are 14 that are not struggling had the ability to start here. And they grew, and maybe they like reading, and so they grew even more. So there's just more kids that have the opportunity to continue growing beyond. So it can be a little bit more challenging to try to catch up the older that you are, because there is so much more of a gap or time for other kids to keep moving beyond where you are. So just massively, massively changed. She is technically in the average range now for her reading, for her age, and the same thing was true for spelling. So she made massive growth. As you can see in the 3rd percentile down here, statistically speaking, if she would have had a statistically significant response, she would have been probably at the 8th percentile, but she went an entire standard deviation beyond that. And she is at the 24th percentile. So when you look at this, you might say, oh, 3rd to 24th, that doesn't seem like that much. But what would have been typical is for her to go from the 3rd to the 5th, or the 3rd to the 4th, and really just continue to make that slow, if any, progress from there. So she massively leapt up to the 24th percentile, putting her again in that average range, low average, but lower in the average, but still in the average range for both reading and spelling, which is just, again, phenomenal. Going to show that you can be an older child with dyslexia and still make statistically significant progress if you actually do the neurological work to help the brain to connect letters and sounds. So I do want to just honor and celebrate Julie throughout this process. As I mentioned at the beginning, she was partnered with us throughout this journey. And so we do require that if you're going to do the program, you have to be committed to do the daily consistent work. It does not work if you do this every so often, or I'm just going to do it when I feel like it. And we actually don't take people on as clients that are going to do that. You have to be committed to doing this work. And so Julie absolutely was, and her data shows for that. So she did maintain daily consistency with the program. She had a deep belief that neuroplasticity was possible and that she and her daughter would achieve that. She leaned into our coaching of both strategy and mindset support. She made learning fun and celebrated small wins. Um, she was full in that neuroplasticity could work, decisiveness, coachability, resourcefulness. She followed the process, and Julie said it's possible, doable, and hard work, and it's going to pay off. So sometimes we get questions about like, was this typical? Is Mimi's growth what actually happens for most kids? Yes, absolutely it is. So on this table, you can see that this is, again, what we were talking about. This represents the typical growth that a child would make in an entire school year. This is what represents statistical significance. So if a program has got statistically significant results for clients, it's going to have that 0.8 or almost that full standard deviation. Our average kiddo who is going through this program doubles and then some that growth again in that short interval of period. So our average kiddo is going through the program in 16 weeks. So this is common data. We measure every single one of our kiddos that comes through the program, and we do consistently see that they are absolutely blowing the socks off of what would be statistically significant results. And we're super proud of that. So if you want to dig more into learning effect sizes, there is a citation down here that you can kind of dig more into that to see. But our results would be right up here at the very top of the 252 greatest influences on student achievement. Again, something we're super proud of. So just, as we kind of close out, I want to just reiterate why it's so, so important for you as a parent to close the gap for your child. So inevitably, there are missed opportunities as a result of continuing to struggle with reading and spelling. In Mimi's case, it was that she didn't really want to volunteer and she was embarrassed to be reading in front of peers. And she had all of these amazing stories that she really, really wanted to write, but she was afraid to pick up the pencil because her spelling was so rough that she was embarrassed to do that. She didn't even want to do that. So there are missed opportunities, current and ongoing struggle, future opportunities. I mean, the fact that she's now going to take a creative writing class. She read 18 books over the Christmas holiday. I mean, it's incredible the things that she's now got access to. But if you don't do that, you continue to have these perpetual struggles. And I think this is really important because it's not just the child with dyslexia that struggles, it's everybody in that sphere that also struggles. So sometimes that's you as the parent who is responsible for doing the homework every single day while they're crying or melting down or very, very upset. That's hard. And that's a suffering. It's also difficult if there are other kiddos in your family that you're trying to support too, and you have to devote all of your time and energy into just this one child. That's a suffering. So, I mean, I think that there's just an incredible amount of loss that happens by not being able to move forward and meaningfully close the gap. But when you do, you have the ability to not only improve academic performance, but you can increase self-esteem and confidence. You get better overall mental health and greater access to opportunities, whether that's opening the doors to classes or confidence or opportunities or the risks that I'm willing to take. There's just an incredible amount of opportunity that opens up when you can read and spell confidently. So I just, if you're listening along, I want to just invite you to two opportunities that I think can help you to take some next steps. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, you know what, I think my child has dyslexia, but I don't actually know. And, I don't want to wait 6 months to get a full neuropsych workup. I don't know that we even need that. I just want to know if they're struggling with dyslexia and if this is something that we're actually dealing with. So if that's you, I would invite you to reach out to our support team and tell us that you'd like access to our dyslexia discovery workshop. So we are doing these all of the time, and we are going to give you the actual assessments that will help you to determine whether or not your child is struggling or if it's just that they don't like reading. So that's option one. And if you're listening and you're like, oh my goodness, Dr. Troy, we have already been on this journey. We have been trying to get support. Or maybe this is a brand new diagnosis. And I know already that I do not want to be one of these families that has years and years of struggle. Then I would invite you to book a complimentary call with our team to see if this intervention is a fit. So we'll go through like a 45-minute deep dive to really get to know what's going on with your child, whether or not you guys would be a fit to work with us. And if that's true, and we find that it is a good fit, we'll walk you through exactly the components of the program and how to get you started. And if it's not a fit, that's okay too. We will definitely let you know that, and we can help you to find something that might better suit your current situation or your needs. So there's really no loss by saying like, oh my gosh, let me just see if this could be the right fit for our family. So again, if you need that support, you can just reach out to our team, emailing support@Retrain the Dyslexic Brain, or you can go to our website, drrebeccatroy.com, and there's a link to connect with the screener, with the team, with the webinar, with a call. So with that, I just wanted to thank you for being here. It's such an honor and a delight to see what Mimi has done, what Julie has done. They have made absolutely life-changing, incredible progress. And we're so, so proud to be able to say, here's an amazing kiddo who has transformed what life is going to look like for her in reading and spelling because of the daily work that she spent. So congrats to Julie and Mimi, and we hope that you join us again for another one of these case studies reviews in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.